Hey everyone, what's up? This is Koos, and you're listening to the first episode of the podcast The Story Behind Time, the show that reveals the story of triathletes who crossed the finish line just before the cutoff time or did not make it to the finish line at all. Today we have Robert on the show. Robert is a 70-year-old triathlete from the US who participated at the 70.3 Ironman in Portugal, where we met him when misfortune hit him hard and saw Robert sitting on the ground with quite a lot of blood. We will discuss everything what happened that day and about Robert's experiences in triathlon. It took a while at the start of the conversation to have a working connection between Washington, D.C. and the Netherlands, but it all worked out fine at the end. Have fun. Apologies. That was quite.
No, no need to apologize. You're a
No.
very persistent Dutchman.
No, as always in life, the unexpected happened.
Yes, but
But for
we
some
solved
reason
it.
it works. We solved it. Many
Yeah.
thanks, many thanks. I got the impression that you wake up quite early. We've sending some emails the last couple of
Yes,
days, and I thought like, well, taking into account the time difference, are you a real
Mhm.
morning person?
I am indeed, Koos.
Yeah,
And even when there's no jet lag to blame, I've
yeah,
always been. But as you get older, you will find this out. As you get older, you tend to have more insomnia and wake up earlier.
yeah. And do you have a specific morning routine or something you like to do?
Yes,
Any
I usually get up and I have one or two coffees and a banana, and then
Yeah,
I read the newspaper, and then I go work out.
yeah, yeah.
Usually.
That's good. And what is a workout?
It varies, obviously. I have a
Yeah,
coach, as I'm sure
yeah,
you do. So from day to day, I usually have two workouts. One of them will be some form of strength or stretching, generally,
yeah,
and the other one will be one of the three main sports.
yeah.
So yeah, I'll in the morning. I'm retired now, so I don't need to go to the swimming pool at 5:30 in the
Yeah,
morning.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Lucky
I
you. I'm jealous.
but
I'm
I
jealous.
feel that I'm best doing my workouts in the morning,
Yeah, yeah.
the intense ones.
And even today, you could still do something, some sort of
Well,
exercise.
yesterday and today were the first 2 days since the race that I
Yeah,
did some strength work,
yeah. Oh,
strength
wow, that's good.
and in the gym that we have in our building.
Yeah,
So I went 12 days without exercise,
yeah.
which for me was extremely difficult, as it would probably be for you. But since I could barely walk, I really didn't have a choice.
And how did the body respond to it? To the first
It's
like
fine.
exercise?
Fine, because I'm not putting any stress on
Yeah,
my foot.
yeah,
Only in some of the exercises, like some of the with the machines with the weights, you have to firmly plant your feet, and I try to to put less weight on the injured foot, but you
yeah,
still put some pressure on it.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Phew. I can imagine that it can also be mentally give some relief to do something actually again. As for us, it's always difficult to sit still and not be able
Yeah.
to do anything, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we're addicted to the endomorphins,
Yeah,
right? It is
yeah.
an addiction, and
It is.
and when I'm not injured, I don't know if you're this way as well, but until I've done my main workout of the day, I'm kind of a little bit apprehensive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, I don't feel, I'm not comfortable. I want to get it over with. I want to do it, and then
yeah,
I'm more comfortable moving on.
yeah. Yeah, it sounds very, very familiar. It sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, really cool. Before maybe we dive into the weeds, I have a lot of actually questions about the race and how we met and what
Uh-huh.
happened there. But maybe you just want to tell something about yourself, give a little bit of background, who you are, when you started triathlon, and how long you are in the sports, a little bit of that stuff.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Kus. Because I've met many cases before, but never a Kus.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
so
correct. Case is a very common name in the Netherlands, and Koes is from Jacobus, and
I see.
it's a little less common, and especially in an international environment, it's a bit difficult. But actually, you
Yeah.
say it quite right, and normally it's even people struggle with it. It's correct.
Uh, Well, I've heard say that the speaking Dutch is really not a language; it's a disease of the throat, right?
It is. It's very
So
correct. It is. It is.
I don't try to pronounce it properly.
No.
Anyway, I was born in the United States. I was born in
Yeah.
Boston as a young boy. At the age of 5, my family moved to Venezuela. I grew up in Latin America, so I'm a native Spanish speaker.
Yeah.
I came back to the United States to go to university, and when I finished, both undergraduate and master's degree in business, I went to the country of Colombia,
Yeah.
where I taught finance. That was my first professional job in my early 20s. I
Yeah.
was a professor of finance at Universidad de los Andes in Bogota.
Yeah. Oh,
I
wow.
was also a heavy smoker, and the altitude in Bogota is 2,800 meters. So, and I'm an asthmatic.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
these factors combined to make me not very
Yeah.
healthy. And on one occasion, one of my brothers dropped by Bogota. He was living in Puerto Rico at the time, and he stopped. This was in the late 70s. He said, "Yeah, everybody's running. You should be running." So he left me his running shoes, and I started running in Bogota.
Yeah.
First, it was like 1 block and then 2 blocks until I got to 1 kilometer. But I started getting up every morning and going for runs um, until it took until I started to be able to run, a few miles in that altitude. And remarkably, I was still smoking. But um, I wrote to my brother in Puerto Rico, said I'm going to Puerto Rico for vacation, and I challenged him to a 5 mile race. So that's how I got started with running. And then a couple of years later, I was accepted into the World's Bank. So I began what turned out to be a 19-year career in Washington, D.C., working for the World Bank. And Washington was a mecca for running. I mean, every weekend there were all these races, 10K races, 5K races, etc. So I started running in these races. I was in my early 30s at that time.
Yeah.
And my focus was not the marathon. My focus was the 10K. And I really wanted to get below a 40-minute 10K. And that took me about 2 years. I kept getting 40 minutes and 50 seconds or 40 minutes and 20
Yeah.
seconds. Eventually,
Oh, so close. Yeah.
eventually I got down to 37 minutes. And then I said, well, why don't I try the marathon? So I ran a marathon. My first marathon was 3 hours and 11 minutes. My second marathon was 3 hours and 3 minutes. So that sort of was a strategy of trying to get fast before you went long. It worked for me as a runner.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
and I'll come back to that when we talk about triathlons, because
Yeah.
triathlons only came into my life much, much later. I was primarily a runner. I think most triathletes don't start out as triathletes. They start out as swimmers, bikers, or runners. In my case, I was a runner. I was an active, competitive marathon runner. And then I injured my lower back. I think it was a combination of shoveling snow and travel. And I had signed up for a marathon in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I was desperate to go do it. So I didn't give my body sufficient rest. And my lower back, my lumbar problems became chronic. So I stopped running. And for 20 years, I didn't run. I went to the gym. I exercised. I met my wife in the gym. So I had a regular gym exercise routine. But throughout my whole life, I've always worked out almost every day, in one form or another. And then at retirement at the age of 65, by then I was running occasionally. I was doing more biking. And I thought, maybe I should try out this triathlon stuff. So I went to a sports clinic, and they diagnosed the problem with my running, which I had a series of issues. I was an overstrider, so they changed the form that I ran. They changed my whole workout routine in the gym, which was traditionally focused, like most men, on the what I call the beach muscles, right? The arms and the chest and
Yeah.
the muscles that you want to show off at the beach.
Yeah.
Which, as a triathlete, you don't need to do those, right? You need to work on your glutes. You need to work on your hip flexors. You need to work on your adductors. And so they totally changed my run form. They totally changed my workout. And thanks to that, today I do triathlons, right?
Yeah.
And I think what has been a saving grace for me is that in the triathlon, you alter your events every day, right? So if I have running is the one that hurts the most at my age. I'm 70 years old now.
Yeah.
So running is the pounding. It's a full impact full body weight, full impact
Yeah.
exercise. So it's the one that takes the longest to recover.
Yeah.
So after I've had a long run, if the next day I swim, the swim actually facilitates the recovery.
Yeah.
Um, so I discovered that, and then I started doing triathlons about 5 years ago. Again, focused on the shorter distances, the Olympic in particular. I had and still have the objective of qualifying for Worlds, the World Triathlon Corporation World. I've qualified for U.S. Nationals 3 times, which requires me to win a race in my age group,
Yeah.
basically, which is the top 10%.
Yeah.
But I haven't qualified for Worlds yet, because when I go to U.S. Nationals, instead of having like 5 or 6 guys in my age group, I have 80 or 90.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's
uh,
competitive. Yeah.
so it's much more competitive.
Yeah.
But this year I moved up to the half Ironman distance,
Yeah.
and I have done 2 prior to Cascais,
Okay.
one in Florida and one in upstate New York.
Yeah.
And I was my times weren't what I was hoping, especially in Florida, but I was improving, and I've signed up for 2 more this year, Cascais and then Cartagena in December. So
Yeah.
this was my big year for moving up to the 70.3 distance. And again, I had my objective has been to qualify for Worlds. I want to go to, well, I guess it's now St. George. I was hoping to be able
Yeah.
to go to,
Kona.
not Kona,
Yeah.
to New Zealand.
Uh,
It was going
to
to be in New Zealand.
Taupo. Yeah, in
Topo,
Taupo,
yeah,
I believe. Yeah. Oh, it's
yeah.
beautiful with the volcano and the
Oh,
lake.
I
It's
know.
like stunning. It's
I,
stunning.
I, I was there in a different capacity as a tourist with my
Yeah.
first wife
Me
40
too.
years ago, and I always dreamed of going back to New Zealand.
Yeah.
But anyway, no matter where they hold it, even if they hold it in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
and I have to swim in one of your canals, I, I,
Yeah.
I would go to the Worlds. And I just turned 70 this year, so I'm fortunate for my age group to have a good chance.
Yeah.
And we started talking about Cascais in my age group.
Yeah.
And only 2 of them finished, because I didn't finish. So I think if I had finished, I would have had for sure a podium finish, but
Yeah.
quite possibly, I would have qualified
Yeah.
for Cascais,
Yeah.
for Worlds.
And do you know what is the finish time of the 2 people who made it to the finish line in Cascais?
They were,
Roughly speaking.
I think one finished just under 7 hours, and the other
Yeah.
finished like 7 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was targeting 6.5 hours.
Yeah.
I had done in upstate New York an Ironman Muscleman,
Yeah.
6:44.
Yeah.
And my swim time in Cascais was better than that.
Yeah.
I was already 3 minutes ahead. Um, and I thought I had a decent chance to improve down to closer to 6.5. If I'd done that, I would have won the race,
Yeah.
clearly. But who knows? I stepped on a
Yeah,
rock
who
and
knows?
everything
Yeah,
changed.
yeah, everything changed. And
Yeah.
when you upgraded to the 70.3 races again, and you then of course have to run half a marathon. Well, yeah, was that the first time, like after running, that you would increase the distance? Yeah, because you first
Yeah,
did 10Ks.
I you mentioned to me that you had done the Ironman without doing much run training, and I had that experience with my first half Ironman in Florida, because I've had a series of nagging injuries in one leg.
Yeah,
Initially it was the adductor, then the hamstring.
yeah,
As you know, when one part of the body is not doing its job, other parts then overcompensate.
yeah,
So it spread from the adductor to the hamstring to the piriformis to the calf, and it
yeah,
took me several months to get it right. But when I did the Ironman in Florida, it wasn't right.
yeah,
So that I did a run walk
yeah,
strategy, and I finished it. But the run took me, I don't know, 2 hours and 45
yeah,
minutes, which is, for a guy who did a full Ironman once in 3 hours and 3 minutes, this was, an
yeah,
incredibly slow and frustrating
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah,
But in Muscleman in upstate New York, I managed to run the whole way, except through
yeah.
the aid
Wow,
stations.
wow.
Um, and I had never run more than 7 miles in training, because I had been gradually building up my training. So
Yeah,
a similar story to the one that you told me.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think that is a valuable lesson, that if you have if you have an injury, or if you have, as in my case, a chronic problem that makes it difficult to tolerate long runs, that you can get your cardio fitness through the bike and through the swim, and
Yeah,
then save the body some of the pounding for race
yeah,
day.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Actually, I could imagine that at your age, you even might want to gamble a bit by cycling a bit more frequently and reduce the runs and maybe
Yeah,
only do it twice a week to stay injury free, to at least be consistent and yeah, avoid like any overtraining with the run because yeah, you can barely recover from it.
yeah.
It's so tough. Do you normally in a normal training week have a maximum of runs that you do, or are you really strict
Um,
on that?
I'm still juggling with this. I think that generally it's been two,
Yeah,
maybe a third run, which would be like a small brick where I
yeah,
do 20 minutes off of the bike. I think for me that would be an ideal would be to do on a regular weekly basis, do a tempo run of 3 to 5 kilometers or a track run, a
yeah,
long run, of up somewhere around, I don't know, 10 to 30, 10 to 25 kilometers, call it,
yeah,
and then a brick run um, off of the bike. That would be the ideal. I haven't been able to manage that on a consistent basis.
yeah.
Uh, we'll see what happens. And obviously now I can't run at all
No, yeah,
with a
it
big
is.
hole.
Yeah. And when you are fit and healthy, how does a normal training week usually look in terms of like number of bikes and number of hours?
I'm switching this year with obviously a big increase from the past because of
Yeah,
the move up to the half Ironman. This year I do about 10 hours a week
yeah,
uh, of training. Um, and I have more time than that. I'm not
yeah,
constrained by work. I'm just constrained by what my body can do.
yeah,
And I think one lesson that I've learned over the years is to listen to the body,
yeah,
right? And it takes a while, but at my age, I already know the difference between soreness and pain coming from soreness, and
yeah,
pain coming from injury.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Do you start to recognize it? I'm also struggling with that and really try to become better at listening to the body and yeah, to better understand the signals that your body is giving you. But sometimes it's really difficult. Sometimes you really feel it for okay, this is just a
Hmm.
pain I can run through, and now I
Yeah,
have to back off. But it's like it's a difficult balance. I
it
find.
is. You're absolutely right, because it's extremely difficult. I don't think anybody gets it right,
Yeah,
because we have to run through pain. We have to swim through pain, and with swimming, the shoulder. With biking, it's maybe you crash or something, or your
yeah,
hem or your quads start to ache, or your
yeah,
your IT band, and obviously with running, everything can hurt.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so we're used to it. We have to live with some pain,
yeah,
from the soreness, from the
yeah,
burden we're putting on our bodies. And I have a 70-year-old body, so
yeah,
but you know, when you have to realize when that pain is different, and pay attention. And also, I think all of us have to have a team of supporters, and one of the members of that team has to be a physical therapist. So
yeah,
I think physical therapy for me has been very, very helpful, has allowed me to get back into endurance athletics after a long absence. And I don't hesitate to go back to my physical therapist when I feel something is not right, and get the help in diagnosing, because sometimes it's not easy to know what muscle it is, right?
yeah.
That
Yeah,
you're having
especially
trouble. Yeah,
especially everything that's in the hip area. I mean,
I
there's
know.
so much. Everything is one big connection, and but
Yeah.
a lot of people have a desk job these days, like myself
No.
included. And when I started running, I didn't even know how to use my glutes. And people said, "Okay, use your glutes." I was
Yeah.
like, "How should I do that? Where is this?" And the same with swimming. I was like sinking like a rock, and I was like, I had like no clue how to put my legs up. And then you start to realize, okay,
Yeah.
I have to do something. And like you say, we only know how to use the beach muscles, but yeah,
Mhm.
those are the muscles that are completely useless when
Yeah. I mean, why do
you
we
want
need big biceps in this sport, right?
for nothing, for nothing. I
and,
was
and
intrigued. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, just gonna say there's some muscles that you had no idea. What is a piriformis? I mean, a glute. I knew what a
Yeah.
glute was, but I didn't know what a piriformis was, and I didn't know
No.
what a QL band
Yeah.
muscle is. And now I
No.
know that
Yeah.
much of my lumbar problems are because of those two
Yeah.
muscles, not because of my disc. It's
Yeah.
some little muscle that connects the lumbar to the spine, called the QL, and the
Yeah.
piriformis, which is some deep muscle hidden in your glute. Um, Anyway.
Yeah, I had the same issue with the piriformis. I can feel it. I can still not identify it. I had the problem for a very long time, and for me, the solution at some point was that a lot of people try to stretch the piriformis all the time, but it might sometimes even be better to make it shorter. Because if you have been stretching it for 5 months, yeah, at some point you cannot even further stretch it. Then, if you still have the issue, it might be helpful to try to do some shorten exercises. But
Yeah.
it's indeed, it's an interesting muscle. And when I look through my Google history, there are like a lot, a lot of these muscle names. I'm like, okay, what is this all about? I was intrigued when you said you started running at the altitude in Bogota, because basically that means that you were like on an altitude camp, like full year around. That at that altitude, it must be like, and I can imagine, yeah, and that time and age, probably you don't have the watches, but with the VO2 max and everything. But do you think you really benefit from that by running at such an altitude for your lung capacity or stuff like that?
No, well, it's obviously, I think it's been documented that running at altitude, makes you a stronger runner. Look at all the Kenyans, right? In the marathon, there's no doubt. But I happened to be living in Bogota. That's where my life was, job was. So I didn't have a choice. For me, because of the combination of altitude and smoking and asthma, made it a long progression to get my running. And obviously, I gave up smoking, but it took me about 6 months to do that. So, when I go to Bogota now, I couldn't run because I'm older. My asthma has gotten more difficult. The pollution in Bogota has gotten much worse, and I'm not used to being at altitude. So I do a lot of charity work in Colombia, but I tend to, to focus mostly on the coast, like Cartagena.
I can imagine. And was anybody running in Bogota at that time in the 70s? Probably
very few people.
Yeah.
They do now. I think over the years they've done a very good job in Colombia to close off main streets, to create bike paths, and they have what they call ciclovia, which is on Sundays in particular. They close off some of the main roads, and everybody, entire families go out on their bicycles and bike around.
Yeah. I just imagine you walking into a store in the 70s in Bogota to ask for running shoes, and some Colombian person like, what is this person asking about? Nobody else is doing this, and you're the only person running there. Like, I've been there as well. I literally figure you on the streets running there. It's amazing.
Well, I was running with my brother's shoes. I couldn't have bought them in Colombia. They would have soccer shoes, right? That'd be the closest equivalent.
Interesting.
But that was only the first year of my marathon. But after a year that I started running, I'd already moved to Washington. And Washington, I don't know if you've ever been here, but it is a very green city. It has a very, very long and important tradition of running in particular.
Yeah, that's interesting. I looked it up this morning. I was interested whether there's an Ironman in Washington, D.C., but I could not find it. No.
They had a Olympic, but the body of water we have here is the Potomac River, which is not the cleanest. So they had to cancel the Olympic distance. It was called the Nations Triathlon several times. We don't have even in I think the closest that we have several half Ironmans in different states. Maryland has an Ironman called Eagle Man. Which is about a 3-hour drive for me from here.
And what's the triathlon culture in Washington, D.C. like?
Oh, it's growing. It's a niche sport, as you know. But it's definitely growing. I belong to a club called Team Z, like Z is in zebra, and there's probably about 300 members of this club.
Okay,
so
that's good.
It's good.
That's nice. Yeah, and then we moved to Cascais. Like you said, you had the 2 races in Florida, which was the time what you were hoping for, and then you had to go to Cascais. And I understood that the travel to Cascais did not really help you. It was not an easy trip to go there, to put it mildly.
Well, when you fly with your bicycle, I think every triathlete knows that's not. It's a pain in the ass, as we Americans would say. You have to disassemble the bike. You have to put it in a bike bag. You have to get a car big enough to transport it to the airport. You have to pay the extra fees to the airline. You have to find a car big enough at the other end, a taxi big enough to get the freaking bike to your hotel. So it's every step of the way is it's additional work. And in my particular case, when my very first flight was delayed, so it was obvious we were going to miss the connection. So the airline rerouted us on a much longer route through Munich. We arrived in Cascais about 10 hours later than we were supposed to. And of course, our bags were still in the United States. So, when you go to a triathlon, we all worry about everything that can go wrong. And we all worry about what did we forget to bring. And we all are monitoring the conditions minute by minute, the rain, the wind, the temperature, the waves on the ocean, and have all these worries about, oh my God, I'm going to have to swim it. I'm going to have to bike in 25-mile-kilometer per hour wind, or I have to have a big hill. And on top of all these worries, then you have the worry that your bike didn't arrive. So that's not fun. But fortunately, it arrived the very next day.
Yeah.
And the hotel I was staying at it was the host hotel for Ironman, and they had a part of the complimentary packages. They had a bike mechanic on at the hotel, and for the first time ever, I've had a bike mechanic reassemble my bike, which was nice. Yeah.
And did you know when you arrived in Lisbon that your bike was still in the US, or did you really have to wait for an hour at the odd size luggage belt and then?
Well, we suspected it hadn't arrived, so I went straight. I split up with my wife. My wife went to see if the baggage cart area, see if it would arrive, and I went straight to the lost and found people and started filling the form, and they were very helpful.
Yeah. And how does it work then? Can they really locate it with like the barcode you get when you check in? That they know where the bike is, or how does it work?
Well, at that point they didn't know where it was, but they put it into their system, and what they told me is this: they would let me know as soon as it arrived. They gave me a number to call back, and they would deliver. And the next day, I hadn't heard from them, and I knew there was another overnight flight from the U.S., the same flight that we missed. I suspected it would probably be on that flight, and it was. So I called them in the afternoon. They said, yes, we received it, and we will send it to your hotel. And by 3:00 in the afternoon, the next day, I had my bike and all my gear, all in luggage.
What a preparation! Did you ever have it before that the bike didn't arrive, or was this the first time?
No, this is the first time.
Yeah.
But I have not flown internationally with my bike before. I've flown domestically with it, but not internationally.
Yeah. I was also really stressed when I arrived in Lisbon. I was walking continuously between like the odd size luggage belt and like the normal luggage belt, and everybody was so stressed. And I had one of this triathlon bags that everybody was using, and then all of a sudden, like 10 of completely the same bags were like coming out of the odd size luggage belt, and all these triathletes were going nuts. Like, are you getting my bike? Are you getting my bike? And nobody had like another label or like a color on it. And it was just insane with like thousands of people arriving in like 48 hours in Lisbon, all with bikes. I believe these people were like, what's happening here?
And then how about the departure, Koos? I don't know if you had the same problem we had leaving on Monday. I think all 2,000 athletes, or I guess there were 4,000 athletes between the two races. At least those were leaving the same morning that I left.
Yeah.
So the queue to drop off after you go through the normal queue to get your baggage tags, you have to go to a second queue, as you know, for the oversized, and that took like almost an hour. And here I am on one foot, trying to solve this problem. Fortunately, my wife was with me, so she dealt with it, and I just went to the gate and waited for her at the gate, and she almost missed the flight, but. She caught it at the very last second, literally.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, it was really stressful. Okay, and if we then go back to the day prior to the race, so then you got your bike, you were like preparing the race. Did you have the chance to do like some recon of the run course or the swim course?
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. 2 days before the race, we hired a tour guide to go to Sintra,
Yeah.
which I'd heard about and I had never done. It was a private tour, so that was very pleasant. And the young man drove us up there. We visited some of the palaces, and then he drove me down on the bike course. So I saw that whole big long hill coming down that we
Yeah.
would take, but I saw it from the car. I didn't try to bike it. I find that 1 or 2 days before the race, I don't really want to spend 2 hours on the bike, maybe half an hour at most. So I'm not good at trying to bike the entire bike course, when I'm supposed to be tapering.
Yeah.
So I saw it from the car. I thought it was beautiful. I was a little bit nervous, not so much about the going up. I was more nervous about coming down. And maybe you can tell me about your experience, whether you had more trouble climbing or descending. But the downside was very technical, very steep.
Yeah.
I don't have disc brakes, and I'm very, I tend to run scared descending. That's a weakness in my caliber. So that was one little thing I was worried about. But otherwise, as I wrote in my race report, the conditions were ideal. I mean, I didn't have the usual worries that I have. In Florida, where I live in the winter, there's always windy. So you're always worried about the wind and the crosswind in particular, and whether the ocean has waves or whether the ocean has current. There was no waves, there was no current in the swim. It was for me until the very last minute when I got to the ramp, it was ideal.
Yeah, it was. I was really nervous because on Thursday and Friday it was so extremely windy. There were
Yeah.
so many waves, and I went out on the bike course. I drove there a few kilometers, and there were like a lot of triathletes, and everybody was like, "Oh my God! If tomorrow there's so much wind, I'm not gonna survive it." And
Yeah.
people were like literally like blowing away and going from the left to the right, and it was
And
insane.
wondering whether they brought the wrong wheels. I was thinking
Yeah, yeah.
I shouldn't have brought my race wheels with the deep rim.
Yeah, yeah, I was actually really surprised because I saw almost all professionals were like racing with a completely closed wheel, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Huh? Why are you doing that with so much elevation, with so much crosswinds and everything?" But yeah, for some reason, those
Well,
people, yeah, well,
those closed wheels, the disc wheels are on the back, and
yeah,
then you have body weight on that. So that's not the problem. The problem is the front.
the front.
I learned that in Florida because I have an 80 millimeter front wheel, and
Yeah,
which was a mistake. I wish I hadn't bought that because in Florida we almost always have crosswinds, and
yeah,
in the front you don't have the body weight on it other than
yeah,
your shoulders. So that's the one where you can get tipped over. Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. I thought the wheel is so much heavier that maybe you don't want to have it at all for all the climbing because it's just so heavy. But
I don't
apparently
think it's
it's
heavier.
fine.
I just think that the black disc. I'm not sure it adds weight as much as it adds aerodynamic, but I
Yeah,
don't know. Mhm.
yeah,
Well,
okay.
the other thing that I was able to do the day before the race is the hotel I was staying at has a lake. There's a golf course,
Yeah,
and there's
okay.
a lake in the middle of the golf course, and they made that available
Yeah,
both days in the mornings. It was freezing cold, but
yeah,
I was able to swim for 15 minutes in the lake
yeah.
at the hotel. Mhm.
That's good. Is that normally your last workout before a race to do like a short swim the day before?
Um, I have not been doing that generally because
Yeah,
I haven't wanted to get my wetsuit wet and then
yeah,
have it wet the next morning.
yeah,
Um, and I don't always have access to a body of water. So my day or 2 days before the race, I might do a short run and I might do like a half-hour bike ride. But I try not to worry. I mean, my attitude at that point is I'm not going to get any more fitness, right? Um,
exactly. Yeah,
all you can really do at that stage is to injure yourself.
yeah,
I understand that, to get your muscles fired up and start, but that's the morning of. Mhm.
yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I'm in the same camp. I do hardly anything the 2 days before the race.
Mhm.
In any case, not more than 30 minutes. And I was just really surprised that actually I did the Ironman on Saturday, and on Friday I saw so many people like doing crazy workouts.
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, tomorrow you have to do an Ironman and you're running here like 10 miles with like a crazy. I was like, how fit are these people? I was like, I
Uh,
cannot do this. I'm like in bed the entire day, just eating. I do not want to walk. And
yeah.
these people are going like for 2 hour bike rides. I was like extremely intimidated, but yeah,
Well,
everybody has his own routine, I would say.
yeah. and maybe they have more fitness, or maybe they just made a tactical mistake. I've heard it said, "Don't leave your race on the training course."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, some people definitely did, I think. And then when we moved to race day, you mentioned in your race report, you said, well, the day before the race, I know I don't have a good sleep, and that's the same. I guess that's the same for everybody. Yeah, you don't have that. And then when you wake up, are you like someone who has a big breakfast? I always ask that because there are like many people who have a complete different opinion about what do you eat before a race.
Yeah. Well, I need the caffeine. Absolutely
Yeah,
need. And that's sometimes a challenge in the hotels because they don't always have caffeine at 4 in the morning.
yeah,
So that's my primary objective. And then I force myself to eat stuff because I'm not hungry. I'm not,
yeah,
but I generally will have a light breakfast. I always have a banana, and
yeah,
then maybe some cereal or some crackers with peanut butter.
yeah,
But you know, I think it would be better for me to have a bigger breakfast, but I have trouble digesting it because I'm nervous, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I understand.
I have to go to the bathroom repeatedly because I'm sure
Yeah,
a lot of that's why there's so many lines in front of the porta potties.
yeah. It is.
We
I
all
saw
get nervous, and those
you.
nerves, represent they manifest themselves through the digestive system. Mhm.
Yeah, even when I was like in at the beach waiting for the
Mhm.
start at Saturday morning, there were so many people with their full wetsuit on, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you see their eyes popping up like, "I have to find the toilet. Wait
Yeah.
5 seconds, right now." That's like
Yeah.
it's always the same, but it was like extremely interesting how that was
Mhm.
going. And another question I had was like normally the race starts like fairly early, around like 7 or 8, but
Yeah.
this race started at like 10, I believe, because the full Ironman was on Saturday and they had to do a lot of like transition work or something, and the race on Sunday started at 10 in the morning, I believe, or something like that, and it was already extremely warm at that point in time. Is it? Yeah,
It's an unusual start time.
yeah,
You're absolutely right. I've never started a race that late. I think in part of the reason is that the time zone, Portugal, it was still dark early in the morning.
yeah,
Uh, Sun didn't come up till 7:30 or 8 in the morning, but still, I mean, an 8 a.m. start would have been fine. So
yeah,
I don't understand why they started at 10. But it was still,
yeah,
I mean, the temperature wasn't a problem for the swim,
yeah. No,
and
it's
maybe
true.
it got to be a problem for the run. But I, of course, wasn't able to complete the race, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And in what starting block were you before the
That was
finish?
confusing. I don't know for the full
Yeah,
iron. For us, they only had two corrals. They had
yeah,
below 30 minutes and below 35 minutes. So
yeah.
I'm like,
Okay.
where does everybody else go? Um, so I
Oh my
got in the
God.
below 35-minute corral, and I finished in, as you know, just under 40 minutes. About
Yeah,
my recorded time was 40 minutes flat, but I was on
yeah,
that ramp. That's where I got injured, so I lost some time, obviously, getting up the ramp.
yeah,
Um, so I think had it not been for the injury, I would have finished at around 39 minutes, probably.
yeah.
Mhm.
And like the 2 3 minutes before the start, are you then really nervous, or are you really composed or like focused? What is
Um,
your mentality at that point?
this was an interesting race. I mean, the master of ceremonies was excellent. The sound system was fantastic. The crowd was gigantic. My wife, I managed to see her, and
Yeah,
I was with a friend, and I saw his wife. So I was actually more. There was a lot of adrenaline, but I was not nervous. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And when you first hit the water, didn't you find it very cold? I was like pretty shocked. I was like, "Ooh, the ocean is it was like freezing."
Yeah, well, I was wearing a full wetsuit, full sleeve
Yeah,
wetsuit, which I had just gotten for this race. I had because I don't like the claustrophobic feeling of
yeah,
being compressed. So all my other races that were wetsuit eligible, I always use a sleeveless one.
yeah,
But I knew that the sleeveless would not work in that temperature. So no,
yeah,
I didn't feel too cold, honestly. There was bumpy until you got to the first turn.
yeah. To the left. Yeah,
That first left-hand turn,
yeah,
there were a lot of bodies, so there was a little bit of bumping. But compared
yeah.
to other races that I've done, there was a lot of space. Once you got past that first turn, you know, I swam the whole rest of the way pretty much alone. I mean, I saw some
Ah,
other
wow.
but I didn't feel crowded. Mm-hmm.
And were you able to see the buoys? Because at Saturday, everybody was wearing a red swim cap, and the
Uh-huh.
buoys were red as well. And I was trying to sight, and I was like, okay, now I see like 5,000 red swim caps, and it's like one red buoy.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to see that? It was impossible.
If I were to criticize one thing about the race, I think that they should have had more buoys.
Yeah.
I think the most races that I've been in, they have every 1 to 200 meters a buoy, right? Yeah. This one definitely. I think there were only 3 or 4 buoys in the whole course. Now, for the full Ironman, was it the same course, but you did 2 loops?
We went a little bit further, like a little bit further to Estoril, 1 kilometer further down, but there was only a buoy. Yeah, at the end. So a lot of people went off course. I also swam like 500 meters too much, because once you go to the left at the start, I had like no clue where I was going. I was just in a big group. I was following feet and feeling elbows and hands in my neck and everywhere. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe we are swimming towards Iceland. I had literally no clue where I was going. I couldn't sight. I was just following people. And yeah, it's always difficult at these Ironman swims with so many people. I'm glad to hear that you say I was swimming alone at some point, or like that you can focus on your own race, your own swim. And
well, sometimes that's a little bit nerve-wracking as well. I think open water swims are the highest anxiety for the triathlete. And even if you do, I live in Florida, so I get to do a lot of open water swims in the winter in the ocean by my house. Even if you do, all of a sudden you might be in the middle of the water, and if you're by yourself and it's very deep and you don't see what's down there, it can be scary. Your mind can start playing games on you, and anxiety is a common problem. So you have to, when you're swimming, is try to concentrate on what you're doing in the moment, right, and not just think about how much you have to go or etc. But Goose, to go 500 meters off a line, that is
it was
huge.
terrible. It was terrible. We went off course like extremely by a big group, and we swam towards a big rock section. And I just remember that at some point I tried to sight, and I was thinking, why am I seeing 3 guys standing on a rock? And we swam to a very shallow part, and 3 people literally ended up a rock, and then the kayaks were sending us to the right direction. And I'm not a good swimmer, so I was like, oh my god, I've swam like 4.3 kilometers. This is crazy.
I've gone like maybe 100 meters off course, but I've never gone anything more than that. That is extreme, 500 meters more.
Zigzagging. And were you able to enjoy the swim at some point? That you find relaxation, that you can enjoy the views, or that you are at ease, or was it like full adrenaline, race modes? And
I the fact that I was executing my swim strategy. I knew that I was going well. I knew having the full sleeve wetsuit was making me faster. I never look at my watch in an open water swim. That just kills time. But I had a sense that I was doing a good time. And later on, when I looked at my results, I was very consistent. The first 500 meters faster because of the beach start. But after the first 500, every other 500 meter interval was very similar time. So I was just focused on keeping a consistent pace, sighting regularly. And as I said, criticism is they should have had more buoys. They should have had 3 more buoys than they had, at least on that course.
And did you have any sense where you were in the group? Because sometimes I find it really difficult when I'm thinking by myself, okay, where am I? And how many people are behind me, in front of me?
I didn't know that. I knew that going into the race, there were only so out of 2,000 participants in that event, at least 1,996 were older than me. But so when I finished, 820th or something like that in the swim, I that was I was very pleased with that, with my swim. But we'll see. No, to answer your question, I could see swimmers around me at all times, but I didn't know how many were ahead of me and how many were behind me. It's impossible to judge.
No, no,
Mm,
for me the same.
mm,
And then
yeah.
yeah, we have the moment that you swim towards that ramp,
Yeah.
and you said you got out of the water. You had the red carpet, and you went a little bit to the left. I
Yeah.
understood.
I don't know if you remember, they had that carpet extending into the water,
Yeah,
which I had not experienced before, and I think they extended into the water because they knew there was a rocky bottom, right?
yeah,
And because it was in the water, it sort of floated a little bit. When you first got to it and you
yeah,
stepped on it, it wasn't firm.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was like stepping on a mattress on a bed, right?
yeah,
So it wasn't very firm. And of course, we have what I call sea legs because we haven't been walking on ground; we've been swimming. So we're on this floating carpet, call it, with sea legs,
yeah,
and I happened to be to the left, and there were other people exiting at the same time. And I remember distinctly taking a step, and I had stepped off the carpet, not intentionally, but that just is what happened. And I instantly felt that I stepped on something sharp. So I felt like I was stabbed in my foot. Um, and I knew it was serious, but I didn't know how serious. But I continued to hobble up the ramp, and then onto the street. And I went another 200 or so yards until I pulled over to the side and looked at my foot, and I realized, no, this is worse than I thought. And I saw a policeman on the other side, and I went over to the policeman, and that's where you saw me.
yeah,
He sat down, he called for medical on his phone, and he gave me this face mask to put on my wound.
yeah,
And then this angel came out of the crowd by the name of Sarah,
yeah,
and she was very helpful.
yeah.
She was
Yeah,
um,
we were standing there and waiting to cross the
mm,
street, and we saw you, and we had the idea that the policeman didn't really know what to do, and it
yeah.
took like so long. It took so
It
long
took
before like the
yeah.
medical people came. I was like, "Ah, this is not normal." And maybe
Mhm.
it was more like than 10 or 15 minutes before these people
Yeah,
came with
more than
medical.
that, I think. And
Yeah,
then you don't know what happened after that, Goose, but it was more of absurd behavior because the medical tent was only 300-400 yards away or
yeah,
meters away, right? And instead of taking me directly to the medical tent in the wheelchair, they took me back down that boat ramp where they had an ambulance parked, and they put me in the ambulance. But then the ambulance wasn't able to get out from where it was because the bikers were already on the course. So I sat in the ambulance for over half an hour, as they were calling for the police to come to escort the ambulance. So because of the bikers, eventually, the police never came, and the driver decided to go in some circuitous route, and and then I understood they were going to take me straight to the hospital because they knew it was a serious wound, but they decided to take me to the medical tent first. Um,
Oh my
so
God.
1 hour later, I'm in a medical tent that we could have gotten to in 5 minutes in the wheelchair, right?
Oh my
And the doctor comes out of the medical tent, looks at me, and says, "Take him to the hospital."
And you were still wearing your wetsuit at that point
Yes,
in time?
yeah.
You must have been freezing.
No, they gave me
Yeah.
obviously they gave me these those aluminum sheets to keep me warm. The woman in the EMT in the ambulance was very nice, but she wasn't very competent,
Yeah.
and the hospital wasn't very competent either.
Yeah.
Um, and they sewed me up. Once I got in there, they got to me pretty quickly, and they sent the doctor in. The doctor looked at it, and then he called for a specialist.
Yeah.
They injected anesthesia directly into the wound, which was not fun. And
Yeah.
then he called a specialist, which I understood was an orthopedist, and the orthopedist said, just put a drainage tube in there and sew them up. And that's what he did. And the drainage tube did its job. It was a lot of blood that kept draining out of it. So
It's so deep.
I got
It
hooked.
was so deep. Did
I
they see any dirt in it? Whether it was like
They
because you
washed
said
it.
yeah,
They
they
washed
washed
it.
it. But do you
One,
really do you think it was a rock? Because it
um,
looked
I
so
would
deep and so
think
sharp. It
so.
could
I
even be
don't.
metal or something.
I don't know. Could have been metal. Could have been
Yeah.
glass. It could have been a
Yeah.
rock. We couldn't see, right?
Yeah.
I was still wading in the water. You know that when you came to the ramp, the water was still up to your knees or above your
Yeah.
knees,
Yeah.
so you didn't really know what you were stepping on.
Yeah.
Um, so, but the biggest mistake that they made at the hospital was they didn't give me an antibiotic. I asked about it.
It's
They said,
impossible.
No, a tetanus shot and this drainage tube should be fine. I think you'll be okay. You don't need, antibiotics are overprescribed, so you won't need that. And then 2 days later, I came down with an infection, and that's
Yeah.
a setback for my recovery. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. I really find it really hard to believe. I mean, with like a foot wound, the infection risk is so high. I mean, it's and in general, I mean, the race, everything about the race in terms of organization was great, but this medical
Mm-hmm.
like plan, it was like a complete failure. Actually,
Yeah.
I was really, really shocked to be honest. Yeah, that in such a big event, they were really not capable to yeah
Mm-hmm.
to fix it. It took like
Yeah.
so long, and then to make all these mistakes, it was like, pff, yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah.
C'est la vie, you know?
Yeah, c'est la vie. And then
Yeah.
actually, then you had to go to the hospital in Spain, and actually that, in hindsight, was like a good step because you got like better support and advice there, right?
Yeah. That was even more painful because they had to open it up.
Yeah.
And your wife was correct. That they had to open it up and leave it open
Yeah.
because they couldn't have the infection back in there, and they did that, which was very painful. And then they washed it and they bandaged it, and they did give me antibiotics. And they took a culture, but I still haven't gotten the culture results.
Yeah.
And 8 days later. So the medical care in Spain wasn't you know, still it was still somewhat deficient because I still
Yeah.
don't know the culture results. But I got to the United States a week later, and
Yeah.
I'm under the care of a wound clinic now. So I
Yeah.
have specialists dealing with wounds, and they did a culture here, and they got a result the next day, and they've changed my antibiotic based on the results of the culture, and
Yeah.
now it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow when I raced. I'm finally starting to see that the wound is starting to close.
Okay.
So I can definitely feel the improvement, but it's still painful to walk. I'm
Yeah,
still very limited. Mm-hmm.
it was very deep, and even the
Yeah.
pictures you sent, we were like,
Mm. Yeah.
it was very serious. I mean, actually, we were surprised that you were able to travel back home. I mean, with such a big wound, to walk around airports and get into a plane, it must have been like devastating, that trip home.
Well, was not easy. In some situations, we were able to get wheelchairs, but because flight connections were tight, and we had to deal with the luggage and everything. But my wife was with me, and she bore the brunt
Yeah.
of that. That was one of the. As I said, I look at the positives, right? The positives
Yeah.
of this was your wife, right,
Yeah.
coming out of the crowd and giving me comfort at a moment where I was very much in need. My wife helping me with all the travel.
Yeah.
My daughter-in-law in Spain is a doctor, so
Yeah.
she
Oh,
also
nice.
helped with changing the dressing and
Yeah.
helped me advising me on what to do.
Yeah.
So and now I'm in very good care here. So it could have been worse. It could have been much worse.
Yeah.
I could have
Yeah.
I could have torn 1 centimeter more. I would have broken the tendon, right? And I
Yeah.
would have probably been looking then at a 9 month recovery and
Oh,
maybe never being completely right. I could have broken a bone. So it was, you know,
you're
it's not
very
the
positive. You're
yeah,
very positive.
it's
That's
not the worst thing that could happen. Hmm.
no. And in terms of walking, did they give you crutches at the beginning, or like how are you even
I've been
able to
using a
even
cane.
step?
I've been
Okay.
using.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you're still using the cane these days?
I do if I'm going a little bit longer. Within the house, I don't need it. Or when I went to the
Yeah.
downstairs, but we're going to my mother-in-law's house. I'll take the cane and for walking
Yeah.
to the restaurant. It's
Yeah.
more for balance than anything. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And what in terms of recovery is now the idea to keep it open, or like to tape it and try to set some steps and get your foot used to putting pressure on it, or what is the
Well,
advice?
the wound center gave me a clear protocol. They want to keep the wound closed as much as possible. There used to be a time when the feeling was that you leave the wound open so that the air will actually help the recovery. They said no, the thinking has changed. They want to keep it closed. They only want me to change the dressing every 3 times a week. So basically every other day.
Wow.
So I can only shower every other day, and then I change the dressing every other day. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's no medication put on the wound. It's just being, there's a dry a gauze covering. Um,
Yeah.
the wound clinic said that by the time I see them again on Tuesday, they expect, I'll be able to walk more comfortably.
Okay.
Um, and then we can discuss whether I can start doing things like swim and cycle.
Yeah.
But
And can you put on socks and shoes actually, or like not at all?
yes,
That case? You
yes,
can. Okay, that's good.
yes.
That's good. Good.
I bought
Yeah.
some neoprene socks to use
Yeah.
in the pool.
Yeah.
They block most of the water, but not 100% of it.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that that would allow me to swim. I mean, she's concerned about the fact that pools have, bacteria. So
Ah,
if the wound is still open, she may not allow me to go swimming.
yeah.
Obviously, to go cycling on the indoor trainer, you have to put pressure on the foot. So I may have to wait 1 or 2 more weeks before I can
Yeah.
resume those sports.
Yeah, I was sitting here. You see my trainer
Yeah,
standing here in the back, and when I was sitting on it yesterday, I was thinking, well, maybe I was thinking about your wound. I was like, if
Mhm.
maybe if it is like more to the back of the foot, like you put a lot of pressure like directly under your toes. So I was thinking like, where is the
Yeah.
wound exactly located? And maybe you might be lucky that it is that part, the middle section, is like not used that much. But
But you stretch it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's in the arch, but the arch
yeah,
is made to stretch. So every time I step, even though I don't step necessarily on the wound, it
yeah,
stretches the wound.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And where are you now in your mind in terms of recovery? Are you like, okay, I'm going to accept the time that is needed to heal, or are you like really focusing to get back to training as soon as possible?
Well, I have this race in 5 weeks, right?
Yeah,
Um, Staring at me. I have to go to Colombia anyway because I
yeah,
have a fundraiser that I've organized, and there's 7 other athletes that are going to participate in this fundraiser, including one young man um, who ran across the United States in support of a charity to reduce plastic pollution going into the oceans.
yeah,
He's quite a remarkable young man. He's only 23 years old. Um, and he started a charity in his native country of Indonesia where they put in barriers to capture plastic before it flows into the river, from the rivers into the ocean. And now they have over 100 rivers where they're collecting the plastics and recycling it. So he has taken an interest in going to Colombia. He's never done an Ironman. He's been training to do this half Ironman there. But obviously, he ran 5,000 kilometers from Los Angeles, from New York to Los Angeles. The run part is not a problem for him. Um, he's coming, and we have many major events organized around this event. So um, I'll be going whether I can compete or not.
yeah,
In my mind, it's not. I know it's not in my hands, so I'm a bit more relaxed about it. Like I said, I'll do what I can do. Um,
yeah,
if I can do the swim and the bike only, that's fine. If I can't do any of it, that's fine. It's not in my control.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. No, I
I'm
understand.
not going to risk my long-term health,
No,
um, by trying to do this race in 5 weeks.
no,
Mm.
no. It must be like an interesting course in Cartagena. I looked it up, and the run is like in the old town. It must like
Yeah,
very beautiful with all the colorful houses in the walls. I've been there once. I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting for the
it
race.
is. It's very challenging because of the run course.
Yeah.
I've been there twice, and I've done I've organized relays where I did the swim, but not the other two events. But 2 years ago when I went, I did the swim, but then the runner, I accompanied the runner at least for the first loop. So I'm very familiar with the run course. Um, Cartagena is a tropical city, right? It's like, having a race in Havana or San Juan. Um, and the temperatures will get very hot. And by the time you are on the run, it's a midday heat. And then you're running on a very hard surface with cobblestones and other concrete in a city that's walled. So there's very little wind benefit. So those are all negatives. The positive is the extraordinary crowd support, because the people, they're narrow little streets, a lot of balconies,
Yeah.
and the people are packed 10 and 15 deep on these little sidewalks and hanging off the
Yeah.
balconies, screaming and cheering, and the hydration is extremely good. Ironman does a good job there. So there's a lot of aid stations that you can stop and get ice and
Yeah.
and rehydrate. Um,
Yeah.
so in the past, there's never been more than one 70-year-old doing that race. So I thought this would be my best chance to make worlds.
Yeah.
If I finished, I would probably qualify, but I think that's unrealistic now, obviously.
I know.
Hmm.
Yeah. I was like, I can admit it, I was fairly intimidated when you said the first time, well, I'm going to do the 70.3 in Cartagena. I was like, who is this guy? It's like a 70-year-old person who's going to Cartagena where it's like a zillion degrees, so humid, going to race. I was like, this is not an easy course. And I looked up the bike course that's like from Cartagena to Barranquilla. I
Yeah,
saw that's like fairly quick and
yeah,
must be
that's flat.
beautiful,
Yeah.
like on that highway
Hmm.
across the sea and everything. Like really stunning. Like really stunning
It
views.
is. I've actually biked that course several times. I go to Cartagena 3 or 4 times a year,
Yeah. Ah, wow. Yeah.
and because I like it very much. And I grew up in Puerto Rico in San Juan, and San Juan,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, old San Juan city is a sister city. It
Yeah.
dates back, 500 years, just like Cartagena, which for
Yeah.
a European 500 years is nothing, right?
Yeah.
You guys have thousands. You go to
Yeah.
pubs that are 2, 3 times as old, but in the Western Hemisphere, this is about as old as it gets.
Yeah.
So I have gone with friends and done the bike course before. It's very fast and flat, mostly flat. The swim is flat, and the water's warm. It's a bay. It's not the ocean, but the water is not very clean. So that would be another reason to be very cautious about the wound. Hmm.
Yeah. 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 You have to be careful. And what's the triathlon culture in Colombia like these days? Is that a sport that is like increasing
It's
in
minuscule. this is
yeah,
this is
I thought
basically the
so.
one event, but it's
Yeah.
taken on a lot more popularity. Some big corporations have been sponsoring it,
Yeah.
like Allianz, the insurance company, and
Yeah.
Chevrolet, and
Yeah.
so the race sells out. It's
Yeah.
always sold out. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I would be interested to see what's the percentage of like local people participating and how many people like foreigners will
Oh,
join
I'm sure it's
because
more than 90% local.
yeah,
Or
okay.
local,
So,
by local I mean local, regional, not just Colombia only.
yeah,
Maybe Ecuador, Panama, Brazil. Some of the neighboring countries are probably represented pretty
yeah.
well as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, it's good that you can at least. I mean, you have like a very good reason that you can go to Cartagena at any event with like the foundation and the project and
Yeah.
yeah, that must be beautiful. Well, that's I will put it on my bucket list to to go
Let
there
me know.
once to that race.
You're always welcome. You and
It's
Sarah, I would love to host you in Fort Lauderdale, where I have my winter home.
yeah.
It's
I
only a 2 hour,
yeah.
2 hour and 15 minute flight from Fort Lauderdale to Cartagena.
Yeah, yeah, it's close. It's close.
So if you want
And
to do it in
yeah,
2022, let me know.
yeah, thank you, thank you. I believe right now, as we're speaking, Ironman Florida is on its way.
Yeah,
I saw something
yes,
at Panama City Beach.
I was
Uh,
monitoring that. Yeah, I have several
yeah,
friends. Yeah.
yeah. Can you swim in Florida only in the sea? Because like yeah, I've been to Florida once to Gainesville because a friend of mine was studying there, and uh, we were talking about open water swims, and even I in the Netherlands are like freaking out in the water when I see only one fish. That we don't have we don't have
Yeah.
anything that even has like one teeth or something.
Mhm.
And then you go to Florida, of course, like every lake, yeah, with all the alligators and everything. That's like insane. Is there any lake in Florida where you can
Oh,
swim?
there's thousands of lakes. There are lots of lakes. Ironman, the Ironman Florida 70.3 that I did in April was in the center of the peninsula, in a
Ah,
lake. It's called
okay.
Haines City, is the town.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
yeah, I
close to
remember. Yeah.
Orlando,
Yeah.
and that's a swim in a lake. And then of course you have both coasts. You have the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
So Florida has got water everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, some people are worried about the animals in the water. I tend to worry more about the wave current. I don't. I try not to think about that. I said what are the chances that I'm going to get a shark fighting me? I mean, it's just so remote that I don't worry about risks that have infinitesimal
Oh,
probabilities.
I love your mentality. I mean, for me, like even the thought that there's like one alligator in the lake that like it just freaks me out. And then you
Yeah.
say like, well, I'm more scared about
Mm.
like the waves or
Mm.
something like that. It's like, oh my god, I
Mm.
really like that. I really like it. Okay, that's really cool. We already are
Mm.
over an hour, I see. So that's
Yeah, I know, and I've got to go to my mother-in-law's house.
yeah,
My
we have
wife's
to wrap
waiting
it
for
up.
me. Yeah.
We have to wrap it up. Many
Please.
thanks for your time. I always have one final question here, and that's my final question. Always is like, what do you think is the most common mistake that age groupers make, like in training or in races? When you look around, you see, okay, that's something that goes wrong.
I think the most common mistake is not to practice transitions. And even now that I've done more than 25 races, I still make mistakes in transitions. But at the beginning, some of the mistakes I made were ridiculous, right? Like running out of transition with my wetsuit still on, or running out without my number, my race bib, and being sent back to get my racing bib, or just taking too much time for so many reasons. And I think age groupers don't realize that if you lose, 5 minutes in transition, figure out how much faster you have to run per kilometer and to run to make up minutes. So that would be my.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. That's a very good answer. Okay. And then I thank you very much for your time and for the explanation. I really liked to hear your story, and let's stay in touch to hear how it is going and the Cartagena and everything. So
I will. I'll send you a race report on that, and I'll send you an invitation. For the fundraiser related invitation.
Yeah.
So you can see what we're doing. And what's your name?
Oh, that will be in June in Luxembourg, the 70.3. So the season here in Europe is quite over now with winter coming in, and I also needed a little bit of off season after the working towards the Ironman Cascais. So I will keep training over the winter, and then I will pick it up gradually in February or March, and then in June I have the 70.3 in Luxembourg, and in August I do the full Ironman in Copenhagen. Flat and not so humid, hopefully a bit quicker. And I like the course there, like the run course in the old city, and it's Denmark is a nice country. I think.
Okay.
I would really love to do this race, so that's my plan for next
year.
Well,
thanks for including me in your podcast. It's an honor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your friendship and your wife's, and please give her my regards.
I will.
Have a great end of the year, Koos.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All the best. Thanks, Robert. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Next week, we have Owen on the show. Owen has finished his first Ironman in Portugal in just under 16 hours with a broken wetsuit. We will discuss everything what happened that day and dive into his story behind time.